Time for the Read Aloud for June 2nd. Okay. But I'll tell you this, if we go in the entrance, as we will, and if you are asked to help, you must promise that you will never tell anyone anything at all about what you see and hear. I will promise, said Miss Frisbee. Again, she thought she had no choice. The owl told me that too. When they approached the entrance again, Miss Frisbee saw that Brutus stood at his post as before, but that another rat had joined him. Two of them, she thought. I hope Mr. Ages knows them both. The new rat saw them coming. He looked alert, dark gray in color, and extraordinarily handsome, though not so huge as Brutus. Mr. Ages, he said, how's the leg? Better, but it will be a while before I can run again. Justin, said Brutus, staring at Miss Frisbee. There she is. That's the one I was telling you about. Is she now? Justin looked at her casually. He did not sound particularly alarmed. Miss Frisbee, said Miss Ages formally, may I present my friend Justin and Brutus? How do you do, Brutus? Brutus sounded doubtful. Miss Frisbee, said Justin, not Mrs. Jonathan Frisbee? She is Miss Jonathan Frisbee, said Mr. Ages, a widow, as you know. Madame, said Justin, bowing politely, it is an honor to meet you. Brutus now looked astonished. You both know her? Who is she? Brutus, said Mr. Ages gently, don't you remember Mr. Jonathan? Brutus wrinkled his brow. Mr. Jonathan? You mean the one dragon? Yes, said Justin quickly, and this is Miss Jonathan. Oh, said Brutus. Then to Miss Frisbee, why don't you tell them? Why don't you tell me? I wouldn't have chased you off. Well, said Miss Frisbee, I did try, but it doesn't matter. No, Mr. Ages added, because on the way out she met me coming in. She needs to talk to Nicodemus, and quickly. Brutus looked doubtful again. Nicodemus? But can she? I mean, how about the rules? What about the plan? Mr. Ages said, that has been taken care of. She has promised secrecy, and she is to be trusted completely. That I myself guarantee. After all, consider who she is. As an afterthought, he added, and who her children are. Who am I then? Miss Frisbee asked herself in wonder. I suppose that too will have to come from Nicodemus. Mr. Ages said to Justin, What about the meeting? It can't be over already. It was temporarily adjourned, said Justin, to wait for you. In fact, I came to find you. Then I suppose we had better go in. Justin led the way through the arched entrance, with Miss Frisbee and Mr. Ages following. Brutus remained outside at his post. Next chapter, in the library. The tunnel led gently downward, and after the first dozen steps, they were in darkness. Miss Frisbee could see nothing at all. Behind her, Mr. Ages limped along. Ahead, she could hear the scuffle of Justin's footsteps. She followed the sound blindly, and then she heard his voice. Just walk straight forward, Miss Frisbee. There's nothing to trip over, and nothing to bump into. If you get off course, you'll feel the wall. He added, the dark part doesn't last long. Now, what did he mean by that, she thought. She thought it over for a minute or two as she walked and had just decided to ask him, when to her surprise, she saw ahead of her a faint glow, a light. But how could there be light down so far? There, we're through it, said Justin cheerfully. I know the blackout bit must be annoying the first time, but it's necessary. But aren't we underground? Oh yes, about 3 feet down by now, I guess. Then how can it be light? I could tell you, Justin said, but if you'll wait 15 seconds, you'll see for yourself. In a few more steps, the tunnel, Miss Frisbee could now discern dimly its shape and direction, took a turn to the right, and she did see for herself. She stopped in astonishment. Ahead of her stretched a long, well-lit hallway. Its ceilings and walls were smoothly curved arch, its floor hard and flat, with a soft layer of carpet down the middle. The light came from the walls, where every foot or so, both sides, a tiny light bulb had been recessed in the hole in which it stood, like a small window, had been covered with a square of colored glass, blue, green, or yellow. The effect was that of a stained glass windows in sunlight. Justin was watching her and smiling. Do you like it? The carpet and the colored glass we don't really need. Some of the wives did that on their own, just for looks. They cut the glass, believe it or not, from old bottles. The carpet was a piece of trim they found somewhere. It's beautiful, said Miss Frisbee said, but how? We've had electricity for 4 years now. 5, said Mr. Ages. 5, said Justin agreeably. The lights, they were very small, very bright twinkling kind. We found them on trees. In fact, most of our lights come from trees. Not until after Christmas, of course. About New Year's, the big light bulbs we had trouble handling. Miss Frisbee was familiar with electricity. Her husband, who knew all kinds of things, had once explained it to her. At night, she had seen the lamps shining in Mr. Fitzgibbon's house, and at Christmas time, the lights that his son strung on a pine tree outside. You mean you just took them? She asked. We were careful to only take a few from each tree, said Mr. Ages. It was like picking fruit. The annual light bulb harvest, we had to go quite far up the road before we had enough. Even so, it took 2 Christmases. Justin, said Mr. Ages, I think we'd better get on. They continued along the corridor, which curved away slightly to the right, so Miss Frisbee could never really tell how long it was and which soon began to incline more steeply into the ground. Miss Frisbee noticed that the air, which should have been dank and damp so deep underground, was on the contrary fresh and clean, and she thought she could even detect a very faint breeze blowing past her ears as she moved. In a few more minutes, the hall widened abruptly into a large oval chamber. Here the lights were set in the ceiling. At the far end, Miss Frisbee could see the long tunnel continued and looked as if it slanted upward again, perhaps to another entrance, a back door. Was this then their destination, the main hall of the rats? But if so, where were all the other rats? The room was entirely empty, not even a stick of furniture. A storeroom, said Justin, sometimes full, now empty. And then she saw that off one side of the chamber there was a stairway leading down, and beside it a small door. Justin led them to the door. For fright only, he said with a grin at Mr. Ages, but considering your limp, I think we can make an exception. The stairs wouldn't be easy. Miss Frisbee looked at the stairway. It went down in a spiral, and each step was neatly inlaid with a rectangular piece of slate. She could not tell how far down it led, since after the first turn of the spiral she could see no more. But she had a feeling it was a very long way down. As Justin said, it would be hard for Mr. Ages. Justin opened the door. It led into a square room that looked like a closet. After you, he said. Miss Frisbee went in, the others followed, and the door swung shut. On the wall were 2 knobs. Justin pushed one of them, and Miss Frisbee, who had never been in an elevator before, gasped and almost fell as she felt the floor suddenly sink beneath her feet. Justin reached out a hand to steady her. It's all right, he said. I should have warned you. But we're falling. Not quite. We're going down, but we've got 2 strong cables and an electric motor holding us. Still, Miss Frisbee held her breath during the rest of the descent until finally the small elevator came to a gentle stop and Justin opened the door. And then she breathed again and looked out. The room before her was at least 3 times as big as the one they had just left. The corridors radiated from it in as many directions as petals from a daisy. Directly opposite the elevator, an open arch led into what looked like a still larger room, seemingly some kind of assembly hall, for it had a raised platform at one end. And now there were rats by dozens, rats standing and talking in groups of 2s and 3s and 4s, rats walking slowly, rats hurrying, rats carrying papers. And Miss Frisbee stepped from the elevator. It became obvious that strangers were a rarity down here, for the hubbub of a dozen conversations stopped abruptly, and all heads turned to look at her. They did not look hostile, nor were they alarmed, since her 2 companions were familiar to them, but merely curious. Then, as quickly as it had died out, the sound of talking began again, as if the rats were too polite to stand and stare. But one of them, a lean rat with a scarred face, left his group and walked toward them. Justin, Mr. Ages, I see we have a guest, he spoke graciously with an air of quiet dignity, and Miss Frisbee noticed 2 more things about him. First, the scar on his face ran across his left eye, and over his eye he wore a black patch, fastened by a cord around his neck. Second, he carried a satchel, rather like a handbag, by a strap over his shoulders. I guess a guest whose name you will recognize, said Justin. She is Mrs. Jonathan Frisbee. Miss Frisbee, this is Nicodemus. A name I recognize indeed, said the rat called Nicodemus. Miss Frisbee, are you perhaps aware of this? Your late husband was one of our greatest friends. You are welcome here. Thank you, said Miss Frisbee, but she was more puzzled than ever. In fact, I did not know that you knew my husband, but I am glad to hear it, because I've come to ask for your help. Miss Frisbee has a problem, said Mr. Ages, an urgent one. If we can help you, we will, said Nicodemus. He asked Miss Ages, can it wait until after the meeting? An hour? We were just ready to begin again. Mr. Ages considered. An hour will make no difference, I think. Nicodemus said, Justin, show Miss Frisbee to the library where she can be comfortable until the meeting is over. By this time, the last of the other assembled rats had made their way into a large meeting hall where they sat facing the raised platform. Nicodemus must follow them, pulling some papers and small reading glass from the satchel at his side as he walked to the front of the room. Justin led Miss Frisbee in another direction, down a corridor to their left, and again she had the impression of a faint, cool breeze against her face. She realized that the corridor she had walked up above, was merely a long entranceway, and that the halls around her were the rats' living quarters. The one down which Justin led her was lined with doors, one of which he opened. In here, he said. The room which they entered was a big and square and well lit, and had a faint, musty smell. It's reasonably comfortable, and if you'd like to read, he gestured at the walls. They were lined with shelves from floor to ceiling, and on the shelves stood Miss Frisbee, dredged in her memory. Books, she said. They're books. Yes, said Justin. Do you read much? Only a little, said Miss Frisbee. My husband taught me, and the children. She started to tell him how, laboriously scratching letters in the earth with a stick. It seemed so long ago, but Justin was leaving. Excuse me, I've got to go to the meeting. I hate meetings, but this one's important. We're finishing up the schedule for the plan. He pronounced it with a capital P, the plan. And we're going to stop there.